Hello and welcome to another edition of the SpareTime Podcast, sponsored by ADR Wear. That's where we get our clothing from. So, in this edition of the SpareTime Podcast, we have yet another PBA bowler, but this is the first PBA bowler from Ireland, and we'd like to welcome Chris Sloan to the podcast. Welcome, Chris.
What's up, guys? Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you for your time with us. So yeah, this is most of the PBA bowlers we've spoken to have been over in the US. So you're in Ireland.
Yeah.
Are you the only Irish PBA bowler?
I am indeed. Hopefully not for long. We're very fortunate that we have a couple of young up-and-comers over the next couple of years that will follow in my footsteps. Hopefully. Hopefully I don't have to go and drag them in my footsteps, but they all seem to be making quite good progress in that general direction. So yeah, for the moment it's just me, but in the near future I would imagine it will not be.
Okay, well, that's good. So how did you originally start in bowling, and when was this?
I started bowling, so very sadly I'm 30 now, which is midlife crisis point that everyone hits when they go to 30, but I'm 30 now, and I started bowling when I was 9 or 10. Nobody in my family bowls. Nobody I knew bowled. I didn't know anybody that bowled. Full stop. Period. End of story. And like all young boys and kids in general, I was brought to a birthday party in a bowling center, and we bowled a game. And this hasn't changed too much over the years. I have always been incredibly competitive. I was very competitive when I bowled that day when I was 10 years old. I finished last out of the group that went. I threw a little temper tantrum, and my mom said, well, if you want to get any better, why don't you join? They have a Saturday morning league, and why don't you join that? So I said, okay. And I joined the league, and kind of haven't turned back since. But yeah, it was it kind of came from I played a couple of sports when I was younger, but I kind of made the decision to stick with bowling because there was nobody else doing it, and I thought it was quite cool because it was so difficult and there were so many different challenges that arose with it. So about 10 years old is when I started.
Okay, if you're having a midlife crisis at 30, it must mean I'm almost dead.
Yeah, I won't worry about it, mate. I live an incredibly fast-paced life in comparison to a lot of people. Probably a little too fast. I'm starting to try and slow down, but I'm knocking on a little bit. I'm much older in my I suppose my mental state than my actual years on this earth. I would like to think, unless I'm having a bad day on the lanes, in which case I'm a lot younger than most people would say. So
okay, so you got into bowling quite young.
yeah.
At what point did you think that maybe there's more to this bowling than just a little bit of fun? What point did you think that things were starting to get serious?
Things were getting serious. I suppose when I was about 15 or 16, the first couple of years that I bowled, I didn't really know that there was bowling tournaments, or it was kind of sadly what it is nowadays and tends to be the case that I've learned not just in Ireland but just worldwide. Every organization seems to have this type of a struggle. It was kind of, if you were in the know, you knew there was tournaments. If you didn't know, you didn't know. So I didn't know that there was tournaments, or like that this is a possible career path that I could take for the first couple of years when I was bowling in the YBC. And I want to say like I was 13 or 14 or something like that. And someone said, hey, there's a tournament on this weekend. Are you playing? And I was like, yeah. And I bowled. And terrible. Which, if I only knew what I was getting myself in for, I got addicted. I got the bug. And I was like, oh, I want to play this more. So I started playing a little bit more competitions and all when I was 13, 14. And when I was 15, they told me about a thing called the Triple Crown, which is obviously, as you are well versed in at this point, and everyone who probably listens and watches your show knows, it's basically England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and I know that's expanded now, but that's who it was when I was around. So they said, would you like to play for Ireland? And I said, yeah, that would be amazing. What do I have to do that? And they were like, well, you got to make it through our ranking system, and then we pick a squad, and then we pick a team from that. And I was like, yeah, this sounds amazing. Like, I get the opportunity to represent my country. And I don't know, there was just like this like switch that flicked in me, like that I was like, oh, this is like really, really prestigious. Like I get the opportunity that most people won't at that age to represent the country. And then they told me at the time, well, you won't get picked because you're two-handed, so I won't worry about it anyway. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I was like, that's pretty interesting. And while I seem relatively well-spoken and mannerly now, over the years I've developed that, because I used to be a little bit, I suppose, what you would say, a little bit of a troublemaker, and I've often let tempers flare. But I decided like I wanted to try and do this, so I committed to it when I was like 15, 16, that like I can make a life out of this, predominantly because everybody told me that I couldn't. And as I said, my type of attitude growing up was, if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to go do it. And I'm going to prove to me, myself, everybody else that like this is something that I can do. And I'm very fortunate that it's finally, I wish it didn't take quite as long, but it's finally started to kind of pay off in that regard. So yeah, about 15, 16.
So they didn't pick you because you were two-handed. No, nowadays it's the other way around.
Yeah, I know, right?
They're not going to pick you because you're one-handed.
Yeah.
So how did you become two-handed? What happened there? Did that just happen, or?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate and unfortunate. I'm a very complicated individual. I'm always very positive and very negative at the same time. But I was very fortunate that I was the only person in Ireland that wanted to bowl two-handed at the time, because it kind of led me, especially with like the way I learned, it meant I had nobody to work with. I had nobody that could teach me. So it put the onus on myself to go off and learn it alone, and figure it out. So I learned by watching YouTube. I learned by, seeing videos of kids bowling like around the world, like Belmo, Oscu and stuff like that. And I was like, right, this is what I want to do. This is much cooler than bowling one-handed. I tried to bowl one-handed for a very, very short time period when they told me I wouldn't make the national team. I'll never forget the conversation, because obviously you have to have that type of a conversation with your parents or your guardian. And I said to my mom, like as a kid, I was like, I got to make the Ireland team. This is like a big thing. And my mom, not being involved in the industry or knowing anybody, she was like, but they told you that you're not going to make the team unless you bowl one-handed. So you got to bowl one-handed. So I was like, okay, yeah, all right, let's do it. I'll give it a try. After a tournament and some practice, figured, well, I'm not going to make the team if I bowl one-handed anyway, because I'm terrible at it. So let's just commit to this and see what happens. And I committed, and sure enough, at that period in time, they didn't pick me for the first year's team. I didn't get to go. I didn't get to go to the EYC, and I just stuck at it. I just kind of gritted my teeth. I've always kind of been one to hunker down, and I tend to overwork, but I like work. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to hunker down. I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to prove them all that they should have picked me. I'm going to give them no option but to pick me next year. And I worked and I trained and I practiced every day. Missed school a couple of times. My mom has came to terms with that now. She didn't quite at the time. And I just kind of got that bug. And then the following year, I got picked for all the teams, and I started medaling around at all the Triple Crowns, winning gold medals, and then the Europeans, making all the Masters cuts and stuff like that. I only got one EYC, but yeah, that was a pretty in-depth early analysis of what happened when I was a kid and how I got into it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how things have changed over the years, because when Ben started 10 years ago, there wasn't hardly any two-handed bowlers around. But even I've noticed over the period of 10 years, there's more and more and more. And I was just thinking, Ben was bowling in the tour finals last week in London.
Yeah,
and nearly every bowler there, the ones that I was watching was two-handed. And two-handed as a style it's much more common now than it ever has been. And I don't know, what's your view on YBCs and two-handed bowling? Because it seems like a lot of them are still concentrating on one-handed bowling.
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of background that perhaps you don't really necessarily know about me either, especially when it comes to that. So I teach two-handed seminars around the world with some of the best players in the world. I'm very fortunate that I work and operate multiple clinics with Mark Baker, Anthony Simonson, Kyle Troop, Chris Vi, all those guys. I'm very fortunate to call Jason, one of my really close friends. I was on the phone to him today. We were chatting about some stuff, and it's the future, man. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. But it flat out is the future. Here in Ireland, I am actually chairperson of the Irish 10-Pin Bowling Association, and we've kind of committed to, running with the future in that regard as well. We just held our first ever two-handed clinic, which was last week or the week before. I should know that because I spoke at it. And I believe we had like 30 odd participants of all the kids that were there. We're all two-handed, and I think in our whole membership base we've only got like 50 or 60 kids, so almost half were two-handed already. I've been very fortunate that I've worked a lot of European events and trade shows and stuff like that in the US with Storm 900 Global, and seeing the difference of two-handed bowling from back then to now, it's just cataclysmic. When I bowled at EYC in Aalborg in 2012, there was myself as a two-hander. There was Jesper Svensson. There was a gentleman called Daniel Vessus who doesn't bowl anymore. And I think there was one other two-hander. So there was 4 two-handed bowlers in the field of 220 kids that were there at the time. Now, there's almost 400 two-handed bowlers at all these EYCs and all these YETs. It is the future. People can be resistant to it, but it's just a funner way for kids to adapt to the game straight away.
And do you think in maybe 10 years' time that sort of 95% of people are going to be two-handed? Because, I'm interested to think people, when they get to my age and that sort of thing, people say, well, it's not sustainable because when you get older, you can't do it and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But, if you started two-handed and you've been bowling two-handed for years, you're not going to be able to just all of a sudden go one-handed because you've got decrepit.
Yeah. So a lot of people get worried about this, right? And I can sit here and I can preach to you that I know it all, right? And I don't. And the best part is nobody does. My generation, which mate, this is why I was saying I sound like an old man, mate. When I say stuff like my generation, we really are the trial and error of this. The Jason Belmontes and the Oscu Palermas, they're like, Oscu and Jay are 10 years older than me, right? So, and I don't really want to oust anybody for their age or anything like that, but like, Jay's 10 years older than me, so he's 40, and he's still competing at the highest level with no physical injuries or issues whatsoever. I don't know many. He's going to kill me if he's not actually 40. I think he might be a year or two younger than that. Anyway, but I don't know many high-level professional athletes that love to compete into their senior age at a super high threshold level. I don't see a scenario where people are struggling to do this as they get older. If you have bad technique or bad bio mechanics, whether you're one-handed, two-handed, or you just use your legs to bowl, it doesn't matter. You're going to get injured. If you have good biomechanics and you stretch and you are well acclimated and you take care of your body over the years, it'll treat you right as you get older too. Belmo's never had any injuries that's been caused by his bowling. Oscar's had a couple of injuries, but a lot of that has stemmed from stuff that he's done off the lanes with the setup that they have in Finland and that. Like, so a lot of things like that. Like his body got hurt, but it was all existential stuff. Similar to myself, I have had a number of injuries, and not one of them has been from load bearing competitively on the lanes. Well, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, you before you went two-handed, you had problems with your back, and then obviously everybody has when the one-handed had problems with the thumb, which you don't get two-handed.
To be fair though, I had problems with my thumb, and I had always had problems with my thumb, getting the thumb out early. I mean, I'm double jointed, so I had like a list of problems with that. I mean, my back problems, that was probably because I didn't do enough work off the lanes. But then when I've gone two-handed, I've bowled a year and a half now. No, about a year now, two-handed. I've never had the worst thing I've done is I've maybe split my finger open once, but that's when you're bowling like 60, 70 games a week, it's going to happen.
Yep.
But I think personally, like when you're bowling one-handed, it's a lot of the one side. Where when you bowl two-handed, it kind of spreads it around your body.
Yeah. So the optimum way with any sport, and I noticed because I work with a lot of different athletes across a lot of different disciplines, and especially in high performance. And I've been very fortunate to work with the Singapore Sports Organization and Sport SG on some actual biomechanics studies, which is all like super in depth of like how two-handed bowling affects and changes your body. When they showed me that side by side with the one-handed stuff, it was kind of like a click moment for me where it was like, there's no real issue, there's no real fear. Now I never had the fear. I was just like, I got to do what I got to do to win, and I don't care if I have to throw my whole body down the lane. But like a lot of people have that stigma, or there's that like, oh, I won't be able to do this when I'm older kind of thing, or whatever. I think we just don't know yet, and people fear the unknown more than that else. Bowling's been an old school kind of older generation style game for so many years that it's kind of like faux pas to not know what it's going to do in 5, 10, 15 years down the line. I think the reason we're seeing more two-handers is predominantly just because the lane surface hooks more, and it's better to obviously be closer and more into the oil than in the dry consistently. So a lot more two-handers are developing based off the lane patterns and the lane surfaces that are being applied to the lanes across the world at the moment. So I think as well as that, like my favorite players growing up were one-handers, obviously, because there wasn't too many two-handers to look at. But I think there's horses for courses in that regard. Like it's kind of like every sport with like the F1, the tennis and stuff. You're going to have styles, and same with fights. Like styles make fights, and styles make do well at certain events. The tennis, someone will play better on clay court versus grass. F1, someone will do better at a particular track because of whatever reason, whatever variable. You're going to have that with one-handed players too. So I don't think the style is going to disappear, but I do think it will be met by probably half and half, thereabouts. If it's not already surpassed that, to be honest. I would see two-handed bowling being the majority in the future, because everyone, when you go to a bowling center, Ben, and you're just practicing and you're next to a lot of open play people, they're using house balls that go straight. And as soon as they see you curve a ball, they think it's cool. So as soon as they see you curve a ball, what's the first thing a kid's going to want to do? He's going to want to try and curve the ball like the professionals do. That's what you see when you see it on TV.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the one-handed, for when people are bowling for fun, that's always one-handed is going to be the default method, because that's the natural way of doing it. And I remember saying to somebody that somebody who didn't bowl, that Ben had gone two-handed bowling, and they thought that meant he bowled with a ball in each hand.
Yeah, I've had a few of them over the years. You got to remember too, like as I say, in the future, I'm hoping that there's going to be more kids coming from Ireland and that. But for the most part, over the last little while, until Hannah kind of came on the scene and a couple of others, predominantly here in Ireland, everyone only kind of knew about the bowling aspect through me talking about it. Because there was no professionals, there was no people. Like we had good bowlers over the years, like Paul Stott and stuff like that. But we never really had like a professional or someone that was truly dedicated to it. So like I grew up with all my friends, none of them bowled. So I'd be like, I'm going bowling again today. And like one of my close friends that I grew up with, only about like 3 or 4 years ago, turned to me and he was just like, bro, I just found out you bowl with like both your hands on the ball. And I was like, yeah. And he was just like, that's nuts. He's like, how'd you do that? And I was like, we've been friends for 10 years and you like all my Instagram stories. How are you only clicking this right now? But it was a generalized question. He was like, I just always thought bowling was just like, straight down the middle, like just throw a house ball and away you go. I was like, no, man. So yeah, you're right. Like people will see it like that.
So how did you get into the two-handed clinics?
Well, I don't know if you've noticed by the start of this chat, but when I get going, I don't stop. In general, I have the gift of the gab, as we would say here in Ireland, but as well as that, I have a thirst for knowledge. I was never a massive scholar with school and stuff. I I loved school and I loved information. No, I didn't love school. That's a lie. I loved information and I loved knowledge, but the way in which it was taught in schools just didn't work for me. I didn't learn that way. I learned by working, and I learned in different ways. And I figured, like, I learned the really hard way, how to bowl two-handed and to have this kind of style. As in, I kind of dug my heels in, and I went to all of the events, and I went to coaches in the UK. I lived in Sweden for a number of years to try and get better at bowling, Singapore, the US, all over to try and learn so that I could get better, because I didn't have a model to build my game off. I had to like trial and error it all. So then I thought, well, I've trialed and errored a lot more than a lot of people in my own regard, because everyone's struggles are individual to themselves. But I was like, I seem to have a relatively decent, kind of knowledge base of this. And I was chatting with Baker when I was over doing a session with him, because I work very well with a lot of different coaches, because to me, I'm trying to build a puzzle. I'm going to steal Simo's line here. I don't know if you've talked to him or not yet, but he used this. He used this when we were in Singapore at our latest clinic, and since I'm on here first, I'm going to steal it so he can't use it. Like, both puzzle, right? And you're trying to like find the right piece to fit. So with me, my puzzle was scattered everywhere, mainly because I was always a little bit highly strung nuts in some regards. So I wanted to go to as many different people to get as many different opinions as possible, so that I could choose between all those opinions. Like, I've worked with, just in the UK, I've worked with, Andy Penny, a plethora of different coaches. My number one coach in the UK, who doesn't coach anymore, who is the man who kind of turned me into the man I am today, is Brian Michael. He was the first real coach outside of a guy that used to help me here in Ireland that I ever worked with. But everyone that I went to over the years was to learn something from. I wasn't going to one coach to learn everything, right? And any coach that normally told me they knew everything, I tended to back away from, because I liked the idea of taking a piece from Mark Baker, taking a piece from a guy called Will Clark in the US, taking a piece from Brian Michael in the UK, and a piece from someone in Singapore, because then my window or my opportunity to learn was much bigger. So I was chatting with Baker, and I said, because he never really worked with too many two-handers before. Wesley and myself and a couple of us, Wesley Lowe was who he initially was working with, and he was like, my son's going to go two-handed, and I feel like this is the way it's going. We should probably start doing this a little bit more. And I was like, yeah, we should. And he was like, have you got Simo's number? And I was like, well, like, we live together. So yeah. I was like, he goes, do you want to ask him to try and see if we can put him in touch, and we'll go from there and we'll see what happens. And it just kind of happened that way, that we decided that it was a need more than nothing else, because a lot of two-handed kids felt, at least in the US, and it is everywhere, but in the US, felt kind of like, not overshadowed, but kind of felt like they shouldn't be bowling two-handed. And we were like, no, you know what? We're going to create like a space and a clinic specifically for two-handers, which was the first launch was, I think, 2021 or 2022 during COVID. We put up 36 spots for this clinic that was in Vegas. It was myself, Kyle True, Chris Vi, Simo, 2 Storm ball reps, and Mark Baker coaching at it. And we charged, I believe it was like $1,200 or $1,500 for the clinic. And it sold out in 30 minutes. All 36 spots with deposits paid, everyone paid. And then there was a waiting list. And then we got enough people on the waiting list to have like another clinic and then maybe another one. And I was like, Bakes. He texted me and he was just like, I can't believe we've so many people. Do we run another clinic? Do we do this? Do we do that? I says, let's just see what happens. And we held a clinic. It was wildly successful. We had another one after that last year. Just because of scheduling with the PBA, it was a little difficult for all of us to get there in one spot. But yeah, I kind of really enjoyed it. And then ever since then, Simo and I kind of branched off out into Asia. I've worked with Singapore over the last number of years. and we've held a couple of clinics there. I've held some in Europe. But yeah, man, that's kind of how that happened. Just fell into it.
So where do you kind of see your clinics going? Do you see it kind of being like a full-time career once you stop bowling, or like what's the ambition for it?
My ambition for the clinics is slightly different to everybody else's. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that because I shouldn't hang everybody else out to dry that does clinics. My thing is that this is trial and error, and when we come to a clinic, we work with the individuals that are there in front of us. We're working with roughly what we know is correct, because we're working with the likes of Anthony Simonson or the games of Kyle Troop or Jason Belmonte or whatever, and they're the highest level of professionals to do it. So it's very individualized to the players that are on the lanes at the events. And like one thing that I said when I started the clinic in Singapore a couple of months ago was, I started the clinic and I apologized to everybody. I said, listen, be very straightforward, which is, I says, we taught you guys a clinic here 4 years ago. I think that's when it was, 2019. And all of that information that we gave you is already out of date. It's all already not irrelevant, but different and changed, because the two-handed style is evolving so rapidly and constantly. The information of a clinic that we held only just before the COVID-19 pandemic was now almost irrelevant. So for me, the main drive behind all of the clinics is the information and giving the opportunity to individuals all around the world to attend these clinics. Like, I would have absolutely bit your hand off if there was a clinic like that in the UK or Ireland when I was growing up. I would have flown anywhere in the world if there was a clinic like that when I was growing up. For the opportunity to be on the lanes with the best players in the world, to learn from the best players in the world, and to just pick their brain for a couple of days, that to me was like, oh, if I had that opportunity and, you know, I had the means to be able to get there, that I would 100% do it. So for me, it's for the information, and it's kind of my way of giving back to the game already. I don't want to focus on the clinics too much. I'll work with my partners that we have for information spreading that and for, you know, helping people, but I still want to focus on my main career right now. And it's very easy to go down a different path if, you know, you end up getting too busy in that regard. So maybe when I'm done, when I hang up the shoes and all that, I'll work and I'll consult, doing a couple more clinics. But at the moment, it's more so for informational purposes for everybody to try and learn and to expand on the growth of the game, because you learn by talking to others. So
yeah. So for people that kind of are interested in the clinics and that, where can they go to find where the next one is and information about them?
So at the moment, how we work, I don't even know if I'm supposed to be saying this or not, and I'm probably going to get in trouble, but that's okay. I get in trouble every day. How we predominantly work or host our clinics is we, and I'll say we by me and Simo, for example, we discuss with a federation what they want to do, and we come to terms with a federation on what they want to work at, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it is. Then the federation agrees. We sign contracts between both parties, and then the federation comes up with all of the information for their bowlers, because obviously they know the schedules of the events that are happening boots on the ground in their country. So we kind of work with your local federation or bowling center if that happens. Alternatively, the Mark Baker clinics that we have in the US is always almost going to be towards September, October, November of the year, because when you try and get that many professionals together at once, it's always very difficult because of our scheduling. However, that said, I was doing out my calendar for next year, and I was already exhausted just looking at it, the amount of travel that I have to do, which is a good thing. But in January, I'll be launching something that everyone keeps asking me for, which shows that I'm slightly out of touch. I will be launching more of a digital presence where on my website, you'll be able to see wherever we're going to host clinics, or countries that we're in talks with associations for hosting clinics, because there hasn't been one in Europe, and I have been absolutely plagued by people to try and host one in Europe. I've been getting nonstop DMs on Instagram about trying to host a two-handed seminar in Europe, whether it be in Sweden or whether it be somewhere. So I'm looking at in what year is it next year? 2025, after the PBA and all that, perhaps hosting one or two clinics in Europe in the summertime.
Awesome. So I just kind of want to focus on your journey as a professional player. So making that step up from amateur to professional, what did that path look like? Did you go straight over to America, or did you play about in Europe a bit? How did that look for you?
Horrible, grueling, terrible, not for everybody. To be the best 1%, you have to do what 99% of people don't want to do. I kind of have that hardened. I have a very thick skull, and I'm very stubborn. So when I bowled to become a professional, I suppose, I started with the YET events, which you guys all play still, or the EBY or whatever they call them now, the Youth European Tour. And then I moved quickly from there onto the EBT Tour. And I kind of grew up on the EBT Tour, to be honest, when I was like 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I was bowling all throughout Europe and Asia, because at the time we used to go to the Middle East, we used to go to Qatar as part of the EBT Tour. So that was kind of my journey. I started in Europe, then I progressed into the Middle East and Asia, and then I think I bowled the World Series of Bowling when I was way too young. Way too young. I think I was 18 or 19 at the time, and raw is an understatement. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. I mean, hell, I don't even think I had a clue what I was doing 4 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And because I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to learn what the best done, how they done it. And I knew it wasn't going to be my time, but I was like, what if I can figure it out? What if I can click it? So like I kept kind of chasing that click moment. So I started on the European Tour. I think, I'm almost positive, I missed the cut at the first 14 EBT tournaments that I went to. It was like a year and a half. And every event I went to, I bowled 2 squads and a Desperado. Then I bowled 3 squads and a Desperado when I started to make a little bit more money. And then I think it was a year and a half in. We were bowling in Bratislava, where the ECC was just held, actually. And I remember I bowled a tournament and I was like, I feel so close. And the lanes were so hard. I was like, I feel so close. I'm going to give the Desperado a go. See what happens. I gave the Desperado a go and I made the cut. And I remember it because I was with Marshall Kent. Me and Marshall were staying together at the time. And we both made the cut, and I made it through the Desperado. And I remember like a sense of relief of like, oh, okay, I can do this. And it was only a Desperado, like, which is how I would look at it now. But back then it meant everything to me. I was like, oh my God, this shows I'm on the right track. You know, if you just hold on and hold on. Sadly then, after making the cut in that one, I made the cut in the next 4 EBTs on the bounce, all through the Desperado. I couldn't make it through the regular qualifying squad. So I found then that like I had to go from, you know, missing cuts to making it through the Desperado to then making it through regular EBT cuts, where it then became eventually not easy, because it's not easy, but then it became much easier for me to make cuts regularly in Europe and around Asia. So the path for me was really, really kind of bang your head against the wall as many times as you possibly can until the wall comes down. And that's true. And I don't hold any, gripes with myself or anyone like that. Like that's very true for me. Even in my professional career in the PBA, I had a lot of success in Europe and I had a lot of success around the world. And when I went to the US, I spent so many years with virtually no success. Competing in tournaments just to get a check was very difficult for me. But I finally kind of started to feel like and find my feet a little bit just before COVID happened. And I started to cash like a little bit more regularly. And then I started to like do a little bit better. And then COVID hit and it just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I kind of like declined again. And now, only now, I feel like I'm kind of on the upscale again, where like everything's kind of starting to kind of catch fire. So it's not an easy path to go and be a professional or to be the top 1% in the world. I encourage it because the journey's been incredible. Has there been days where I have hated it? 100%. Has there been days where I thought I want to quit? 100%. That said, I don't quit. I'm very kind of tenacious in that regard, that I'm like, I'll just keep going. I'll plow through, and whatever I got to do, I'll figure it out so I can get there. And, I'm pretty glad that I did, because it worked out pretty good now being an exempt player next year. So
Awesome. So excuse my naivety here, right? What's a Desperado squad? Because I've heard about them a lot, but I don't know exactly what they are.
So Desperado squad is something that was pretty unique to Europe at the time, essentially. So you have your regular, let's say EBT was 6 games qualifying with a re-entry. And when you would re-enter, you obviously had another opportunity to make the cut. The Desperado was always held at the very end of qualifying, and it was a 1-game shootout to make the final. You ended up paying a large premium. So let's say, for example, if the squad was €150 to bowl all 6 games, you could pay €50 in a separate squad, which was just 1 game of bowling, and they took the top 4 from that 1 game of bowling. And you would then make the final in a lower ranked position. So a very difficult way, very high pressure, intense, because obviously you only get 1 game to bowl well in it, and then you would make the finals from there.
Awesome. So obviously you said, your early days of EBTs, even in Asia and especially in America, was really tough for you. So what did you kind of take away and learn from your first couple of years, and how did you use that to shape where you get to now?
I just never gave up. I'm kind of like that with everything that I do. I was very raw emotionally. I was very raw physically. I didn't really take too much. I didn't put too much emphasis on the physicality of all the travel and competing all the time. I was younger. I just assumed I was invincible. After having knee surgery and hurting my hip and stuff like that, I still think I'm invincible, right? I'm gonna think I'm invincible until like the day I go. But I didn't take care of myself very well when I was younger. But I enjoyed every moment of like the journey to get there. Like whether it was like my best friends are all from scattered throughout the world, and it's all thanks to bowling. Bowling kind of gave me everything. So the way I looked at it was, if I could just keep going and figure it out, it would eventually click. And that's all I was looking for, was that click moment. And I had multiple click moments throughout my career, whether it was finishing second in the World Cup in China in 2016, or getting a medal at the World Men's Championships and different bits and pieces like that. To me, my puzzle was no pieces were put together from the start of my career. And now I would say if I had 1,000-piece puzzle, I would say I've about 100 or maybe 300 pieces put together in that puzzle. I still got a lot of learning to do, but the journey to figure all that out just is very difficult. But if you have the will and the want to just keep plowing ahead, that's what it is for me, man.
Yeah. So once you kind of learn the physical and mental demands of bowling on the PBA tour full time, traveling all the time, having such a busy schedule, what did you kind of do to manage that workload?
So I've got a crazy workload in general, and all my friends will laugh at me and say, you're a professional bowler, you don't have a big workload. But I do a lot of stuff externally off the lanes. So I do work with sports psychologists. Over the years, I've worked with a number of them, some good, some terrible, some great. Same as everything, you got to find the right mix for you. But I run business outside of the industry as well as in the industry as well. I have pro shops. I have business outside of the industry. I run the national governing body for Tempin Bowling here in Ireland and stuff. I suppose really it was just all essentially time management. And I'm not perfect at it at all by any stretch of the imagination. I just wanted to try and emphasize, and take scope of what was important to me. Over the years, I lost focus from time to time, whether it was, my attention would be drawn more to, let's just say, the pro shop for an extra couple of months because I was making more money immediately versus the extra hours of training that I was putting in. on the lanes and stuff like that. So it was very easy for me to get distracted and to get not unmotivated, but to veer. So just always kind of bringing myself back to bowling gave me everything. So I'm going to keep at it and stick at it until I figure it all out. So just being able to bring myself back to center was kind of something that I worked with. But over the years, and I hate when people used to say this, but it is true. Like, I know everyone says, like, you got a great talent or you're amazing at, like, how you throw it and stuff like that. And that's great. That came from hard work. It didn't come from, like, you know, just overnight I figured it all out. Like, that came from, like, ridiculously hard work. And the biggest issue with me was not the 5'7" size of me or the, you know, the rev rate. It was between my ears. As I said, I used to be very heated, very argumentative. I'm now, I suppose, only argumentative. I'm not heated anymore. But for me, dialing in the maturity aspect and really being able to, like, learn how to utilize the mental game that I learned from bowling in everyday life changed me completely. Like, for example, I despise reading, okay? But I read maybe a book every couple of weeks. I read every single night. I pick up a book and I read it because I know the benefits that it gives me for my competitive lifestyle. Like, I've read, what have I got here? I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got like 12 books that I've read this year alone just on sports psychology and psychology. I truly believe that psychology is the key to everything that you want in life, whether it's high performance or whether it's just to do better in your job or your everyday life. So that's something that I really had to kind of focus in on.
You said earlier on about sports psychologists, and you said some good and some not so good. What do you think makes a good sports psychologist?
You know, ever since I became chair of the Irish Tennis and Bowling Association, and I'm working with multiple different sports organizations in general, I became a much more politically correct person. If you had done this podcast with me a few years ago, I would have been able to give you a very out straight answer. But I'll still give you an out straight answer, but it'll at least be PG. The easiest way to put it, man, is someone that will actually listen and that isn't just there to just assume you're similar to the next athlete. Everyone's struggle is individual and is important to themselves. Me not making a cut at a PBA can feel just as bad as a junior bowler to a junior bowler missing a cut at a JBT event. You know, the feeling of the pressure and the disappointment and all of that stuff is very specific to an individual, and being fortunate enough to work with people that give you the right tools to learn how to deal with those is very important. Like, I remember I worked with a sports psychologist. It was a few years ago now, and as I say, I used to be a much more arrogant individual, which I know is hard for a lot of people to believe. But I remember I was sitting there and I was working with this person, and I drove 11 hours to work with this person. This was how committed I was to try and figure my head out, because the girl that I was dating at the time was like, if you can just, you know, figure that out. And she was also into psychology. She was like, if you can figure that out, you know, I think it's going to unlock a lot for you. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And I drove 11 hours to work with this psychologist, and everyone told me he was the business. And I was with him for like 2 or 3 hours. I remember we finished that session and I says, let me buy you dinner and we'll continue on from there. So we went and we were having a chat anyway at dinner. And I realized when I was talking to him that he wasn't paying any attention. And I get it. At the end of the day, it's just another job to those people. But in certain scenarios, having a personal touch where you can actually help somebody is very, very important. Now, where I'm at in my life currently, I've been fortunate enough that because I've worked with a couple of the right people over the last couple of years, they gave me the tools to deal with all that myself. I currently don't work with a sports psychologist. I touch base every now and again with the last one that I was working with, because I finally had that like mental maturity and clarity with the tools that they provided for me to do it all myself, if that makes sense, and to how to juggle it and stuff. But I'd be remiss if I said I'd done everything by myself. I've been very fortunate. I've had a decent support system in the background, and yeah, that's just kind of how I plowed through it. How to tell of a good sports psychologist, I suppose, is just make sure that they're listening, man, and that they actually care in that regard. Sport gives a lot of people things in life that they wouldn't have otherwise, and if our athletes are reaching out and are struggling, you should be there to help them. So yeah. that would be one.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but you said you read lots of books, a lot of psychology books and that sort of thing. And, the mental game is something that, I've talked about a lot on this podcast for various reasons. And it seems that in bowling, to me, that there's a lot of emphasis put on the physical game.
Yeah.
But the emphasis on the mental game is maybe like 10% or something like that.
Yeah.
But everybody seems to acknowledge that it's like a 50-50 thing. It's 50% physical, 50% mental. But nobody there's not a lot of people put the amount of effort into the side of the mental game, maybe outside of the PBA, of course. Maybe it deserves. So why do you think that is?
I think predominantly it's a comfort thing. So I'll use an example, and I could be completely wrong while using this example. And this is what often gets me in trouble, is when I just tend to go off script all the time. But let's say, for example, you're watching a movie and Zac Efron comes on the movie and he's got an 8-pack. Yeah. You look and you say, Jesus, I'd like to have an 8-pack. And you go, okay, how do I get an 8-pack? And you go to Google and you Google, how do I get an 8-pack or a 6-pack? How do I get shredded? Okay. You Google that, you look at that and you go, seems like a lot of work. This doesn't look too bad, actually. I'll hold on to what I've got. A lot of people deal with their own struggles on a daily basis, whether it's, life-changing or not. They feel like they have the tools already to deal with what's put in front of them. So they don't emphasize the performance that they can gain by opening their mind to the knowledge of psychology in that regards. So I think as well, you guys are fortunate with doing this podcast, right? Because you're going to have the opportunity to talk to a lot of professional athletes who all have a similar mindset. We're all looking for 1% or 10% or 5%. But the realistic scope of the world is not everybody is looking for that. So, and with bowling, you'll hear a lot of times when people are winning in tournaments, it's, I worked a little bit more on my mental game, or I had my head screwed on, or, I was in a flow state. Like most athletes, those are the people that we admire and we look up to. But realistically, they're the 10 to 5%, the 1%, the 0.001%. It's not easy to sit down and read a book. Like I said to you, I hated reading. I still don't love it, but I know the benefit it'll give me by actually sitting down and doing it. And I have a friend in Iceland who's a pretty good bowler, or he's living in Sweden now. He's a pretty good bowler. Arnold despises reading. And I gave him a book and I said, read this. And he said, no. I said, cool. I said, see, when you come back to me next year and you say you're not doing well, I don't want to hear it. He goes, what you mean? And I go, I don't want to hear it, because I don't have a lot of sympathy for a lot of people, which gets me in a lot of trouble too. But I said, you're telling me you want to be one of the best in the world. He goes, yeah. And I says, what are you willing to do? He says, I'm going to practice for 6 hours a day. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I said, good for you, bro. I said, that's absolutely the spirit. I said, you have to do other things as well. You have to. It is not a one size fits all. You can't practice your way to the top. You might be the best at repeating, but you won't know how to win. You won't know how to deal with emotions or scenarios that happen in the moment unless you open your mind to all of these things. So he goes, I'm not reading it. He says, I hate it. And I says, buy the audio book. This is 2024, man. I was like, you don't have to physically sit and read it, but listen to the words, or, you know, expand your mind in that capability. And he was like, huh, okay, done that. Finished second in San Marino the week after or something along those lines. And he was like, that was a good idea. I was like, yeah. I was like, it's not rocket science. It's just pushing people out of their comfort zones is not a very easily done thing. So it's much easier, instead of you working on your head, to buy a new bowling ball. Or it's much easier for you to go to a bowling center that the house shot's a little bit softer than the sport shot you're going to play on. You know, so people tend to take that cop out a little bit more. Not everybody, but that's the reality of why there's not as many people focus on the mental aspect of things.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on there. And something I often say is that, you know, not just in bowling, but in life in general, you know, you see people who have some sort of problem in life or issue in life, and whatever it be, you know, whether it be in debt or something with a health or whatever. But to do what they need to do to change that, pushing them so far out of the comfort zone that they are so uncomfortable that they feel more comfortable being uncomfortable in their normal sort of uncomfortable state. And so you've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to be able to change things. And, you know, so many people don't get that. And that's why, you know, they look at doing something like people join a gym to go 5 times and never go again, because it's that mental state that they need to commit to. And if they, you know, if they don't commit to that, because as we all know, the human mind is the evolution of the human mind was back in caveman days and that sort of thing. And the human mind is still very much geared towards survival. And, you know, it likes security, it likes comfort. And that's one of the reasons I think that it's so uncomfortable for people to change, because the mind doesn't like something it doesn't know, and it tries to pull you back into a zone of comfort. And I just think that there's so many benefits that bowlers would get into this sort of thing. And, you know, we see it when, you know, when Ben's bowling tournaments, and this is something I taught Ben very early on. And if you have a bad shot, then you haven't got to react to it. You know, we see people doing things like, you know, the body language, the swearing, all that sort of thing. And, you know, I told Ben fairly early on that what you're doing, you're actually teaching your mind.
You're reinforcing
by doing these things. But now Ben doesn't do any of this, but I still see it in bowlers all over the place to take a bad shot. They might kick the equipment, or they swear or whatever. And it's these are just fundamentals. And I just don't understand why there's not such a following for the mental game. Because for me, who isn't a great bowler, this is the fascinating side of things.
Right. Like, so I'll touch on that. And I'm guilty, right, for a start, of doing everything you just mentioned, right? Like, definitely there's bowling centers, people all throughout the world that will be able to tell you for 100% fact, Sloan done X, Y, Z, W, you know, hit himself, stabbed himself in the leg with a scissors. Don't want to relive that. You know, kicked the chair, done all these terrible things, right, over the years, because I was so frustrated and I was so highly competitive. But I didn't realize the stuff that I could do off the lanes to, like, make myself more comfortable in those moments, so that I wasn't using raw emotion to deal with it. Now, am I still competitive where if I need to strike to win or to make it through the finals or something like that, do I get upset when that happens? Absolutely. But I'm not getting frustrated in myself as frequently. I still do it. We all do. It's competitive. It's sport. It's a sport. But, like, focusing on what you can control and how you react to situations changes what you can actually do in those situations, instead of letting yourself become overwhelmed with emotion. Now, look, we're all humans. That's going to happen. You're going to have emotional outbursts from time to time. A lot of the times it means that it's important to you, or that it's something that you're trying to do and achieve. But if you do it too often, like you said, your brain is reinforcing that this is an okay way to deal with struggle or problems when it isn't. You have to deal with them objectively. You have to put them to the side, and you have to, just be like, okay, this is what I can deal with in this moment. This is what I can deal with in this moment. And I would absolutely encourage you to try and bring this conversation up to me in the middle of a PBA tournament when I'm, kicking my bag and fuming and doing everything different to what I've just said to you now. But the fact of the matter is the heat of the moment versus what going in. If you go in well-versed and well-prepared, you deal with those situations better than if it's just raw, pure emotion, which is what I was my whole career almost, to be honest. Like, I really had no mental maturity on the lanes. And I remember there was a gentleman, I'm actually going out for dinner with him on Friday. He used to say to me, he was like, Chris, you're like, which is ironic, he's like, you're like a 30-year-old. This was 10 years ago. He goes, you're like a 30-year-old off the lanes. He goes, and on the lanes, you're acting like a child. And I was just like, you don't understand how much I want this. And now, 10 years later, I'm like, he was right. He used to always say to me, if I could tame the storm myself, and that wasn't a paid promo by Storm there, but if I could tame the storm within myself, that, like, I'd have more success. And I didn't do that until a little later or closer to now in my career. And I really should have. If I had that honed into me at a young age, I truly believe my path would have been a lot smoother to get to where I am today. I just kind of had to go through a little bit more of a rocky route than people that are more tame and calm, like Frankie, for example,
Yeah, I'm gonna say, like, so I was on a call last night with Verity Calling. We were literally talking about the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying that how we talk about different mental emotions, and I'm probably very similar to you. I'm sure my dad can tell you. I'm sure anyone that's grown up bowling with me can tell you that, like, if I had a bad game, I used to lose my head, kick stuff, throw stuff. Like, you've been around it, and it's one of those where it happens. But I feel like what I kind of learned is that you do something the first time and it makes a difference, and then you think, oh, well, if I manage to just keep my head, then it gets better. Because what happens a lot when you're younger is, once you lose it, and you see it with a lot of bowlers now, especially I do. Even playing in Europe, you see it where you'll look at a kid who's clearly lost his head, and you think, well, that's me beating him because he's completely lost it. And I think if you understand the importance of the difference it makes by being able to keep your head, it's massive. And I said to Verity yesterday, like, if I play 1,000 games, 2,000 games a year, I'm gonna lose my head in some of them. But if I can lose my head in 10 games rather than 100 games, it's gonna make a massive difference.
Yeah, and it'll make a massive difference to your actual growth as a human as well. And this is not me preaching that I'm, a great person or anything along those lines, but it'll make your journey as a person better and easier if you deal with those situations better, which then in turn will feed your bowling game better. I'll give you a quick story on how everything I'm saying here is do as I say, not as I do necessarily. During the PBA Tour trials just recently, like, managed to make the cut at and qualify out of, I worked really, really hard, and I've had a lot of ups and downs in my career over the last couple of years with injuries and personal issues off the lanes, life circumstances changing and stuff. And the PBA had just been very unsuccessful for me for the last number of years, and it is what it is. I'm not, one of these who feels sorry for himself. I just kind of pull myself up and get along with it and figure it out. We're at the tour trials, and about 8 weeks before the tour trials, I said, I'm going to go to Europe. I'm going to bowl a couple of tournaments as like a pre-warm-up. And the week before I went to Europe, I was doing something that I shouldn't have been doing. And I broke my big toe on my left foot, right? And I thought, oh, what a disaster. Maybe it's not that bad, okay? And I was like, we'll figure it out. It'll be okay. Went to the doctor anyway. They said to me, we're not 100% sure if it's broke. It doesn't look great. We're going to get the scans. We're going to call you. If you don't hear from us by 2:00 tomorrow, you can go to Europe, go to your tournament, but just take it easy. Yeah. Take it nice and calm. So I said, okay, cool. No problem. Didn't hear from them at 2:00. I assumed I'm golden. I'm good to go. So I left. Had my phone on silent, as it turned out. So maybe I didn't want to hear from them more than anything else. So I flew off anyway to wherever I was. And as it turned out, I had a broken toe. and it was 8 weeks before the tour trials, and I was at an EBT, and I was like, God damn it, I don't know if I want to push myself, and I'll always push myself harder than, if I feel like I can't do it, I'll push myself even more and more and more, detrimentally so sometimes. But I went, okay, you know you have a broken toe now. You could play 6 squads today, or however many squads are in the day, and you can make the cut. Or you could taper off a little bit and prepare for the tour trials, which means the most to you in 8 weeks' time. Okay? So I was relatively sensible for the first time in my career. I didn't push it too far. I played a couple of squads here, a couple of squads there, and I just made sure that my toe was okay. So I come back from Europe, and then I take a little bit of rest, and then I train back to my training schedule for the PBA Tour Trials. I go to the Tour Trials, and everything's going absolutely phenomenal. I have virtually no injury in my toe anymore because enough time has passed where the pain had gone, and the break would start to heal or whatever. But it had shifted into like my foot from my toe because I was still on it and I wasn't fully resting. So I'm bowling the Tour Trials, and things are going relatively well. I'm in a very good spot before the last block. I make the flip from like 46 down to like lane 3 or 4. And I ball 142 the last game before the very last round of the Tour Trials. And I was sitting in like 6th, I think, before this last game. I ball 142 and essentially almost knocked myself out of the event by having such a bad game, because I went from being like 60 pins safe inside the cut with 1 squad to go to being like 80 outside of the cut with a squad to go. And the Tour Trials determined my whole 2025. So, like a very unsensible young man that I was only a couple of months ago, I walked out of the bowling center and I was very, very upset with myself. And I kicked one of my triple rollers very, very, very hard, very extensively. And I was like, oh, that hurt. I was like, that was really sore. And obviously in the moment I had to act like it didn't hurt because you're surrounded by all your competitors and stuff like that. We had a 2-hour break. Me, Arna, Carl Walgreen, and someone else, can't remember who it was, had to go off for food. And we went to some sandwich place. And I lay on the seat with my foot there like that the whole time. And they were like, you okay, Chris? You good? And I was like, yeah, Grant, don't worry about it. I'm fine. I was like, all good, ready to go, blah, 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 blah. So I kind of bit down on the gum shield, as they'd say in boxing or whatever. And I went, I'll be all right. Don't worry about it. So I had a couple of coffees and, just kind of got my head into that flow state going into the last block. And I pushed through it. And I ended up making it successfully. Knew I needed to throw all 5 to make it by a pin or 2. Done that. And then when I got back to Europe, as it turned out, I had broken the other toe by kicking the bag. So that had happened earlier in the day, which was a little bit of silly adversity from me just blowing up in that moment. But I dealt with it. Obviously, it's not ideal. Would not recommend it, right? Triple rollers are very heavy, as I have now learned, right? Very bad way to learn this lesson. But because I didn't panic and because I have a relatively decent pain threshold and all that, how I dealt with it on the break was I didn't focus on the fact that my foot was killing me and that it was like, oh my God, I'm after doing something stupid and now it's going to cause me a big problem when I make like this last round, because I wasn't panicked going into the last round. I was like, okay, I bowled 140 and I kicked the bag. My foot hurts and I still have 6 games to go. So in my mind, I was like, right, I can be upset and worried about my foot and the 140, and then I'll be chasing myself like a rabbit again, or I can get on with it, just focus on what's in front of me and go from there, which is what happened. And honestly, in the last block, it barely hurt at all, really. Like, it was killing me before and it was killing me after. But during the block, because I was so focused on I was running through my routines, I was like just really, really in like a hyper flow state. It really didn't hurt all that bad. And I was just focusing on what I could control in that moment. And then sure enough, after I made it and the next day, and when I went and got some scans, they were like, yeah, you broke your right toe. I was like, cool. So I had to let it heal up. So, but kind of, control what you can control, deal with things, because you're going to make mistakes. As a human, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have an outburst, but just leaving it and letting go of it and then moving on in a positive manner is way more important than dwelling on if, you've done something wrong before. But yeah, I sadly have wrote the book on things you shouldn't do inside a bowling center while competing. And I believe I'm probably in my first chapter of things you should do. So we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to keep you here all day because I'm conscious of the time. And I know it's a bit late. So we'll fly through 2 more questions and then we'll let you get back to what you were doing.
No worries.
So the penultimate question from me is, when you finish bowling, you hang up your shoes for the last time, what legacy do you hope to have left on bowling?
Oh, I don't know, man. I used to always like hold that like real near and dear to me. Like I still do outside of the bowling industry and inside the bowling industry. Like I want I want what I have done to have meant something for a long period of time. And I was always like super focused on I should do this, I should do this, I should do this, or if I do this, this will happen. If I do this, this will happen. Honestly, kind of the older I'm getting, I'm just like, I just want to be able to help people along the way experience what I got to experience and what I was fortunate enough to experience. Like, I want to enjoy the moment. I've spent a lot of time in my life not enjoying the moments, good, bad, indifferent. When I hang up the shoes, I want to say that I had a good career with multiple titles, all over the world, that I developed friendships and relationships throughout all that. And that's kind of the way I want to hang them up, man. I just want to be one of the best. I want to be considered by my peers as one of the best. And after that, and even if my peers don't think it, as long as I believe in myself, I don't really need anyone else to.
Mm-hmm. So the last question is, and it's an important one for us because without this, me DMing people on Instagram, being a little bit of a pest, it only gets you so far, So the only way for us to grow the podcast and to continue to get bigger and continue to be able to put out episodes, more importantly, because my DMs only go so deep, is if you could nominate one guy to help bring onto the podcast next, or girl who you think would have a good story to tell or would be good to bring on the podcast, who would you recommend to bring on the podcast?
Depends on who you've had on already. I'm relatively fortunate that I know a lot of people in the industry. I work with a lot of people in the industry and stuff like that. Everyone's story is so unique and individual to themselves that, like, I'm sure what I've said tonight will touch on with a certain group. And then if you have, Packy Hanrahan on, what he says will touch on with a certain group. But I mean, to me, not just because he's my best friend, like, Simo's the most unique and most creative bowler in the world ever, maybe. I always kind of say Belmo's the, greatest of all time, but Simo's the best to ever do it. Pretty simple in that regard. Like, I always have it really, really difficult because I'm really close friends with both of them. And like, I always, in all my clinics, I talk about how Simo just like the best. And then I hear from the other side from Jay and I'm like, oh God, I also think he's like the best. But I would say Simo, man. Anthony has a very unique story. He's very tenacious. Myself and himself are very similar. He has a pretty unique story to tell, and the more places that he can tell it, the more young kids will maybe have a better understanding of him. Him, Jesper, those kind of guys.
Yeah. Well, I think if I get any more PBA bonus to ask Jason to come on the podcast, he might put a restraining order on me because
Jay.
We've had I think I've had Amleto, I've had Tom Clark, Parker. I think I've had about 4 people asking to come on the podcast, so he's probably sick of me by now.
Yeah, no, Jay, to be fair, has a crazy amount of obligations with everything that he does and stuff like that. And when I was on to him earlier today, because we were, hang on, I'll see if I just pull it up here. I'll tell you exactly how long I was on to him today for. We chatted about everything PBA, all those things that were coming up for like the last little while. Yeah, we were on the phone for about an hour and a half. We were just chatting about everything, and he was telling me about all the obligations that he has coming up over the next couple of months. He would be obviously the mecca to get on, but his schedule is just nuts, man.
100%. I mean, for me, it's something to work towards, and maybe once we get 150 episodes, we might get him on in his retirement home in maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. We'll get him.
You'll get there before then. I think what you're doing is great. I think anyone that is dedicated to talking and listening to people's stories and giving athletes an opportunity to platform their stories is essential and beneficial to the sport. So just you giving the athletes the opportunity to discuss what they want to discuss is huge, because it's beneficial for them too, as a stepping stone into later parts of their career when they transition off the lanes. So I know you're young and you're only kind of doing this the last little while and all, but like I think what you're doing is great, and I think honestly it's something that the game needs more of, you know. So how many episodes have you done so far?
30 nearly. I think we've been going about a year and a bit.
Right. All PBA guys?
No, so when we first started, I'm pretty sure it was like I was the first episode, because I wanted Martin to go on because I was out in France, and I thought, well, I can't say come on my podcast. Oh, where is it? Well, we haven't got one yet. So you know, we started from the people in England and people who I knew personally, and then it kind of branched out. But we've had the likes of Chris Barnes on, Parker Bone on, and you kind of look back in hindsight and think, a year ago, like it was me. And I'd sat down in front of a computer and I was like, well, this might go somewhere, it might not. And now we've spoken to some of the biggest names in bowling. So for me, it's that journey of, you know, where else do you get the opportunity to speak to the best in the world and learn from them? So I think on that perspective, it's a really good thing. And, you know, it's helping to progress bowling as well, which is massive for me. And, you know, especially if you can help bring someone like Anthony Simonson on the podcast, then that would be huge.
Yeah, him while we were sitting here, I kind of thought of another guy, and I don't know if you've had him on or not, but he'd be a very good person. I'd actually be interested in hearing his story. I know him a little bit, but I don't know him as well as I know. I'm fortunate, right? Like, I understand. I know a lot of the big guys, and I get the opportunity. Like, Dom's flying over tomorrow for 4 days. We're just going to hang out and practice. He's staying at the house, and we're going to practice for a couple of days. But I don't know this gentleman very well, but I think he has a massive story to tell everybody. Is a guy called David Kroll. Bugger. He won his first title this year, and he came out of the PTQ pools essentially. He had a very tough road to get to where he got to, and I think it'd be a really cool and a really unique story to hear what he has to say, because he was just a PTQ bowler. He bowled a couple of PBA events, never really had much success, and then this year is a nomination for Player of the Year. So I think he'd be a really cool person to have on as well. But I'll shoot Simon a text for you. I don't mind doing that and see what he has to say.
Would appreciate that a lot.
Chris, it's been amazing. I think we probably asked less than 10% of the questions that we've got on the list here. So I think we're going to have to get you back on it at some other point in the future, because we've got so many questions we wanted to ask you, but we've run out of time. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us on the Spare Time podcast today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks very much for having me, guys.
So if you've enjoyed what you've been watching here today, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the Spare Time podcast. We do these every now and again. We'd like to then again thank ADR Wear for sponsoring the Spare Time podcast. And so for me, Nigel, and him,
Ben,
it's goodbye, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
See you later, guys.